all the busyness that we don't actually sit and listen to God and talk to God and hear from him. And I think you're right. I think a lot of times we're scared of what we might hear. Maybe we're scared that we'll hear we're a failure. Maybe we're scared we'll hear that God is not pleased with us, or we're scared that he's going to tell us to do something we don't want to do.
Exactly. Yes. It's like, no, I can't do it right now, God. I have to clean the house.
And I got to clean. This laundry's not going to do itself, you know? Welcome back to the Before Midnight podcast, and happy October. I can't believe it's actually October. That is
believe
so
it.
I mean, technically when we're filming, it's not October, but this episode is going live in October, and that is so weird to me because it's not far away. I feel like this season is already going by fast, and it's my favorite. So I gotta enjoy every second of it.
It's true. It's time to decorate. It's time to get your coffees. I'm sure by this point, though, everyone watching this is, it's October, but back in September right now, I'm just like reminding myself this is going to be done soon. Like it's going to be November soon. So
I know, it's crazy. You really have to not put off like joy, like
that's
in
true.
general, but you have to, not be like, oh, I'll do that next time. It's like, no, like, if this is a season you love, enjoy it and do the things that you're wanting to do, because time goes by so fast. But when you do things that you enjoy and you make memories, it tends to like make time linger a bit longer.
It's true.
Jeff and I have noticed that when we do a lot in our days, when we look back on a year and we've done a lot that year, then it tends to feel like, wow, that was only a year ago. That feels longer. But if you don't do much, I feel like it goes by a lot faster. So it's just important to make sure that you don't put those things off.
Yeah, exactly.
Do the things.
It's kind of like on a road trip when you're like, you go to places that you want to see during the road trip.
Yeah.
It kind of makes it more of an event. And so you think about that stuff. But if you're just going on a straight road the whole time and there's nothing to see, it kind of makes it all feel like one big thing.
Oh my gosh,
like,
yes.
It's like, what do we do? Like that went by.
I know that happened to us on our road trip out here, right? Felicia, like, there were times when it was like, oh, cool. And then there were times when it was like, I see nothing and I've seen nothing for 8 hours.
Yes, but the good thing was all the food stops. I feel like the food stops is what made it was like getting to that next food is what kept me going.
That's all I thought of. Wings, Chick-fil-A. Yeah,
exactly.
Okay, well, on that note, we are talking today.
Not about any of that.
Not about any of that, but on this spooky October day, I hope you're having an extra spooky day. We are talking about the bondage of busy. And that is something that I think can actually help. I was trying to be spooky.
That's busyness. So scary.
Well, busyness, it should scare you, because here's the thing is this time of year, I think especially, you've got kids going back to school. A lot of times we get back into routines, and then we've got holiday plans coming up and travel and all kinds of stuff. And I think it's a time when it can start to get really busy compared to the summer season. It's a different pace. And there's a trap that I think we can fall into when it comes to busyness, where we end up so busy and so focused on our busyness that we tend to miss, just like what we were talking about, right? Don't let fall get away from you, and don't, miss out on the things you wanted to do this season because you're so busy. This happens to all of us if we're not careful, because it sneaks up on you. And I think the bondage of busy is a good word for it, because it really can be bondage. We can commit ourselves to so many things, even if it's just mentally, right? Maybe it's commitments you've made to other people, but maybe it's just a mental standard you're holding yourself to. That's you in bondage. Like, my house has to be clean. I have to clean it this much. I have to cook this many meals. I have to be a part of this many activities. I have to do, like, there's a lot of things that we've probably put pressure on ourselves for that nobody else is expecting us to do. And so really kind of breaking out of that mindset of just breaking out of that bondage of busy to evaluate what actually needs to be done, but what we can free ourselves up from as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so true. And like with busyness too, I think a lot of the times we can try to keep ourselves busy because we're afraid of what's outside of that bubble. It's like if
Mm,
we're just
yeah.
doing what we know, with cleaning our house, like all those things that you mentioned, making these meals and um being at home and like being at work. Like I think a lot of people who would consider themselves like a workaholic, I feel like there might be something behind that of like, I like this routine. Like, this is safe. Work is where I feel safe. And so, if we can just create this idea in our heads that, oh, well, I can't do that tonight. I've got to be here. And like, we can say no to opportunities in our life by excusing it with, oh, I have so much to do. I just can't do that. And I know that we are thinking about talking about that movie, The Cinderella Story with Hilary Duff.
Yeah.
And I
Hey,
feel like
Diner
that was, yeah,
Girl.
hey, Diner Girl. I feel like that was such an example of like, she liked not being seen. She liked not being noticed and stuff. And so she was in her job and she would just keep herself kind of behind the scenes. And that was a way to keep herself safe from feeling that rejection?
Oh, absolutely. And that is, I think, something that I actually think I wrote that down. That is something that I think a lot of times we fall into that causes us to be so busy is like, okay, asking ourselves, why am I busy? Um, Being busy can be a distraction from fear, from insecurity, from feeling like a failure. Because if I just stay busy, then I must be a success somewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even if I feel like I'm failing over here, if my marriage is failing, if I'm failing with my kids, if I'm failing in my job, if I'm failing in my health, if I'm failing in my dreams, if I just stay busy, I give myself the illusion of success and it gives me like that high so that I don't actually address the things that maybe really need to be addressed. And I, in a
Yeah.
sense, can stay invisible, like you said. Like she really wanted to be invisible. She really didn't want to be invisible, right? She wanted to be the girl that was seen. But that's terrifying because what if you're really seen and then you're rejected, right? Like that's what we're all trying to avoid is that like our true selves being rejected. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, it was easier just to hide behind the apron and the diner girl and the busyness and yeah.
Yeah, it's so true. And like, this whole concept or this whole topic made me think of that verse. When God says, I came that you may have life and have it in abundance. And a busy life is definitely not the abundance that God was referring to. It wasn't like I
Right.
came so that you may have life and, have your comforts or have stuff like that. It's like, if we want to have that abundant life that God has called us to and that He's wanting to provide for us, it's going to take us stopping on the tracks sometimes in life because we can, like, the thing is with busyness, and even with busyness, I think that, like, even though this isn't work, like, even just being on our phones and just like, people call it like doom scrolling, just like being distracted by something else, work related, or just social media and stuff like that. Like, we might sometimes feel like there's an end to that pile of work or that there's an end. Like, I'm going to scroll enough on my phone where I'm going to feel like I'm satisfied and I don't want to do it anymore. But the thing with all those sorts of things is that there's never really a bottom to the pile. Like, your to-do list in life is never going to just come to an end. Like, there's always going to be more. So unless we really open the door to God being allowed to come in and stop us and be like, no, like, it's time to put a break on that because I want to take you to this next place, or I want you to step out in, outside of your comfort zone into this. It's like, that's the only way that we're going to be able to live that abundant life with God. It's not through our routines, it's not through our to-do list, but it's really giving God the wheel in our life, and letting Him do what He wants to do, which is definitely not going to usually be in our day-to-day routines that we set for ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like I remember back in Colorado where you're at, a lot of the hikes, it's like there's always that false summit right? Where like you get over the hill and you're like, oh, I can see the top. We're going to get there. And you get there and actually there's a whole nother place you have to hike. And then you get there and there's a whole nother place. It's like all those false summits keep, hope deferred makes the heart sick.
Yeah.
And that's why hiking can be really hard. That and many other reasons. But a lot of times it's like that to-do list. It's like a false bottom. It's like, I'm going to get to the bottom of this, but then you don't. And then over time, it can make your heart sick, thinking that you're going to get it done. Plus, there's also people, and maybe we're all like this, or maybe it's women. I don't know. I feel like it's a pretty shared thing, but there's like I'd love to hear the psychology on this, but there's like something that happens when you check off something, right? Like,
I think it's like, I mean, there's probably more to it, but I think it's like dopamine's released when we feel like we've crossed off something off of our list.
So yeah, that can be interesting because while it's good to actually get the stuff done in your life that you need to get done, sometimes it's almost like we add more to our plates just so we can get more done.
Yeah.
Even if it's small things, but it's because we want that high of like checking things off. And it's almost like the checking of the thing off is what we're after rather than actually producing the fruit in our life that all of these things we're trying to produce with. And it's just such it's amazing. It's actually brilliant of the enemy to get Christians so distracted by all the busyness that we don't actually sit and listen to God and talk to God and hear from him. And I think you're right. I think a lot of times we're scared of what we might hear. Maybe we're scared that we'll hear we're a failure. Maybe we're scared we'll hear that God is not pleased with us, or we're scared that he's going to tell us to do something we don't want to do.
Exactly. Yes. It's like, no, I can't do it right now, God. I have to clean the house.
And I got to clean. This laundry's not going to do itself, And so we put those walls up, but it really shows a lack of understanding of how good God is.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's like you said, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. But Jesus said, I came to give you life. And in the Amplified, it says, in abundance till it overflows. That is how good he is. He's not trying to take things from us. He's trying to give to us and enhance our lives. But we're so afraid because we don't trust him.
Yeah.
That we don't want to actually sit and spend time with him and let him pour into us. It's kind of too, like, have you ever noticed those people? I feel like it tends to be more extroverts. I could be wrong. It does depend on the person. But notice when people are uncomfortable with silence and they always feel like they have to fill the space, even if you're like, I'm still thinking about that, but you keep talking, like, like it's, what I'm saying? Like,
no, honestly, I can be like that sometimes, and it's funny because I'm not an extrovert. But the other day, it was actually at the staff picnic. Jeff said something about like, guys, let's just sit here in silence. And I was like, no, silence sucks. But it's like, the thing was, it's not that I actually think that. Like, I actually really enjoy silence sometimes. But like, I struggle, depending on who I'm with, I can struggle to allow the silence. Like, I'm like, I need to say something right now.
It's true. It is a struggle because I think in our society, we've been taught that, like, we've been subtly taught that if you're not saying anything, the conversation's going terribly. So we feel we need to interject. And so anyway, that's just, it is funny. If you ever want to try having a conversation with someone and just let some silence happen and see if they are able to let that happen.
So anyways,
and
like cheese.
And the point that I've been saying over and over again is just, I'm going to say it again. Okay, great.
That makes me think of sorry, I interrupted you, but that makes me think of that Switchfoot song. If you're something to the noise, turn off this song. If you're, man, I'm sure somebody will know what I'm talking about. If you're no. Anyway, but like, I love listening to that because, it's talking about their song. And it's like, if this is adding to the noise, turn off this song. But it's just like, I feel like we are so programmed for some reason to just need the noise. Like, even if you're alone in your car, it's like, I need music to be playing right now. I need a podcast. Like, I need something to, not this podcast.
No, this podcasting is always a good idea.
But there is like this need in a lot of people because we're trying to silence what's going up in our minds, or maybe we're trying to keep ourselves from, following of like God's voice in our life. But it's like all that noise that we just create in our lives just to keep us from facing things or listening to our own thoughts.
It's so true. But then we want to know what God is trying to tell us to do and where he's trying to tell us to go. And we wonder why it's so hard to know what he's saying. It's because, we haven't spent time listening to him and recognizing his voice. He's one of many voices that we hear. And so it's just, of course, it's the enemy just trying to distract us. But of course, any episode talking about busy would not be complete without the story of Mary and Martha. And so I have something I want to bring up, but it's probably something you've all heard. But anyway, the story of Mary and Martha is just such a good example of it. And you can find it in Luke chapter 10, starting in verse 38. As Jesus and the disciples continued on their way to Jerusalem, they came to a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. Her sister Mary sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he taught, but Martha was distracted by the big dinner she was preparing. She came to Jesus and said, "Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits here while I do all the work? Tell her to come and help me." But the Lord said to her, "My dear Martha, you are worried and upset over all these details. There is only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken away from her." And of course, we know this story, and it's like, oh, Martha, Martha, like she's so busy. But notice she's the one who invited Jesus into her home. And it's like, how many times do we allow a good thing, right? Like bringing someone in, showing hospitality, preparing a meal for someone. That is a good thing. It's not bad that Martha did that. What was not good is her comparison of Mary, right? Mary was concerned with spending time with Jesus. Martha, I think, probably felt guilty not spending that time with Jesus, and so needed Martha to come in and help, or Mary to come in and help her, so that she would feel like, no, what I'm doing is good and what I'm doing is right. Yeah. And of course, Jesus wasn't going to let her think that. It's like, no, choosing to spend time with me is never the wrong answer. But also hosting people and preparing a meal for them is not always the wrong answer. But notice it says that, like, Jesus said to her, "You are worried and upset over all these details." He didn't say, "You are trying to cook me a meal and that is bad." He didn't say that. He said, "You are worried and upset over all these details." It's the worry, it's the distraction, it's the frustration that he said wasn't good. And so I think that's what it is. It's not that cleaning your house is bad, taking care of your errands, taking care of your family, taking care of the things that need to get done. That is important. And we need to be doing those things. But it's when you feel yourself starting to get into worry and frustration and concern, now you're concerned about these things. It says, Jesus said, be concerned for nothing, right? And so we shouldn't have to worry about these things. And then another thing that I think is really important to mention, because Martha just gets a bad rep in the Bible, but when Lazarus dies, who was the first person, or who was the person that came running out to Jesus? Martha. Martha is the one that came running out to Jesus and embraced him and told him what happened and said that he died, but was like, "But you're here." Her faith was instantly in Jesus, while Mary was back at the house crying. And so I just want to point that out, because sometimes we just feel like, well, I guess I don't know how to balance this, but it's like, no, it's not that Martha was doing all the wrong things. It's that her concern was in the wrong place, but her concern quickly went to the right place. And then she was able to draw on Jesus when it mattered most. So it's not too late. It's never too late to make that shift,
Yeah, it's true. And I feel like with that story, the thing that really sticks out to me is how God says that you're upset about so many things, but only one of them is important. I think like that's kind of the idea of that. And I think a lot of the times, like, especially when people don't have a lot of huge worries going on in their life, we can start to make small things bigger than they are, Like,
oh, yeah.
Like you see this, like, I guess one example is just with kids, you know, they haven't really, a lot of them haven't had a lot of trials in their life. They haven't had a lot of things that have really come against them. And so for them, like, if they lose their favorite toy, it's like the biggest thing in the world, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think for us, a lot of times, because we might not have like the craziest things going on in our life or the most difficult seasons happening, we can start to make those little things like cleaning our house or, you know, like the commute to work, they become such a bigger deal to us, and we become so much more anxious about them than is really fitting for the situation, you know? And like,
Yes.
when God says talking with me and being with me is what's important, you know? It's like, it's wonderful that she wanted to make Jesus a meal and she wanted to clean her house and all this stuff. But like the chores and the meal and like getting stuff cleaned up from the kitchen is not always that important compared to other things happening. But a lot of times we can just make the molehills into mountains when we don't have a lot of other things happening in our life, you know?
It's so true. When you were saying that, it reminded me of a movie Jeff and I just recently watched. We just recently went through the Bridget Jones Diary trilogy. So I know this is an old thing, but I just
love that
recently saw
movie.
it. The first one I love.
I love the first one.
It's so good. And then the second one I liked, and then we just watched the third one. Have you seen that? It's more recent. I mean, it's like
I
2017.
think I may have watched like part of it on a plane one time.
Yeah, that one I thought was better than the second one. But anyway, so it was actually like kind of interesting. But so I just went through this whole thing. So bear with me. I know this is old news, but I was like, wow, this is like such a good movie. But what you were saying, you made me think of in the second movie where she's like with the guy, but they're not married. And, you know, they have issues. And so like, surprise, surprise, right? And, but she ends up, long story short, ends up in jail in another country. And not enough time to explain that. But basically, she's broken up with the guy because she, you know, thinks that maybe he has feelings for another woman and he wasn't like sticking up for her and stuff. And so anyway, they kind of like broke up, right? She was just tired of it. So then she's in this jail in another country. It's like a poor country, and she's with all the women are together in one cell. And so
I know what this. Yeah, I've seen
have
this.
you seen
Remember?
it?
I do. Yeah, yeah.
So they're all together, and she's like, you know, kind of pouring her heart out about her relationship and how it didn't work out. And the girls one by one start going like, yeah, you know, I was with a guy, and you know, then he started beating me and, you know, hurting me and like all this like terrible stuff, right? And so I finally left him, right? And then it's like another girl says the same thing, like, yeah, he was beating me and stole all my money and like all this stuff. And then they're like, so what'd your man do? And she's like, well, you know, he didn't stick up for me when he should have at his work. And it made me feel bad. And, and, you know, the realization is dawning on her. And then she goes, and, you know, and he beat me and stole my money. And so, and they're like, oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I remember that. Yeah, yeah.
And you see the realization hit her of like, oh my gosh, why was I complaining? I have an amazing guy, or I had an amazing guy. And so anyway, that made me think of that. And it made me think of it too when I was watching the movie of like, man, the things we complain about, if you could see what other people have to deal with, whether it's in another country or even just people that you know, some of the stuff people go through is hard and difficult. And even some of the people I've met out here, it's like what people are going through is crazy sometimes. And then it just makes all your problems go,
life is so like, perspective is so much of our mood and our mindset and everything. Like it's so true.
It is so good. And it was a funny way of, looking at it, but it's true.
Yes.
And going back to the Cinderella story that you're talking about, the movie with Hilary Duff and Chad Michael Murray, I know there's been many renditions after, but that is the Cinderella story. Yeah. And so good. But I noticed that, like, Hilary Duff's character, Cinderella, right? She gets so busy. And like you said, she really was kind of trying to be invisible so she didn't have to think about all these other things. And something that I noticed is like, I'm trying to remember because it's been a little bit since I've seen it, like a few months, but she was putting up with it because she wanted money for college, right? Like she kind of had to wait a certain time, and she basically needed something from Fiona, her evil stepmother, in order to kind of be able to go off and go to college. So she was kind of putting up with it until then. And a lot of times I think we see God like that. We treat God kind of like the evil stepmother in our life of busy. It's like, oh, well, I got to show God that I can handle this, or I got to like stay busy so that I can show that I'm a good Christian, or that I'm a good wife, or a good mom, or a good friend, or a good church member. And we kind of equate God to the evil stepmother rather than the prince, who, when Cinderella meets the prince, I mean, there's nothing she can do to like for him, right? He's the prince, he owns everything, he's her ruler, right? Like there's nothing she can like do for him. She can't clean his palace, she can't wash his clothes, she can't make his food. Like there's nothing. He just wants her. And I think that's the reality of our relationship with God and with Jesus. He's our prince. He just wants to spend time with us. He's already done everything for us. He's inviting us into this kingdom, into this world with him. But so often we think I have to earn it. And that's like the evil stepmother mentality rather than the prince mentality. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the evil stepmother, and I was thinking with busyness and stuff like that, and whenever we decide to kind of like step into that abundant life that God calls us to, there's going to be people who are going to try to keep us back, or just situations or hurdles and stuff like that. And that's like, it's true in all of the greatest movies that have been made. It's like somebody kind of living their life, and then they're called to something greater. Like you can think about Narnia or something like that, or the movie we're talking about right now. Like she's called to something greater. And whenever that happens, the evil stepmother, or our enemy, is going to try to put us back in our place of like, no, you don't have time for that, or you don't have the ability to do that and stuff like that. Like in the movie, when she gets into that college she really wanted, the mom like hides it and tells her that she didn't get in. Like she, fakes a fake one that says she's unaccepted and stuff like that. And it kind of just like takes all the life out of her in that moment. Like all the excitement that she had and everything for going to that school, or the potential and the hope of everything. It's like everything's just kind of deflated in her. And so we need to be aware of that in our life, that whenever we try to take the next step, or whenever God's going to call us into abundance, it is going to be faced with friction, But the beautiful thing is, it's like those lies that you believe about yourself of like, I can't do this, or I don't have the capacity to do this, is not true, especially if it's a call from God. If God's called you there, he is there, and he's like going to prepare the way for you. He's living inside of you, and he's going to give you the strength you need to move into that more abundant life that you have that hope for.
All right. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode. If you haven't, then be sure and subscribe to the podcast so you can see all of the fun, spooky, and holiday episodes that we have coming your way very soon.
And if you didn't know, we're also on Instagram and Facebook, so make sure to check us out on there. And until next week, remember
to have courage
and be kind.